Ed Stahl's son came home from school at the age of 5 and told him he didn't think the Bible was true. Ed saw a need to teach the evidence and truth of the Bible to youth, parents, and churches through the curriculum that he puts together. Listen to Ed as he tells us this is what's happening to your kids in school and in college. How do you go to the church youth and talk about this? And how do you get them ready to be tested?
How do you get them ready? Well, the number one thing is that I try to stress is that parents, it's their my primary responsibility. The church comes along the side, but the parents and the church collectively have to work together. But it's the parents' main responsibility. In fact, there's a verse in Deuteronomy that basically says, I'm going to paraphrase it a lot, but it basically says 24/7, you have to be training your kids in the Lord. And so it's really the job of the parents. So I also talk to parents. I do a training for parents on raising godly children in a secular culture, where I do two things. I try to make them aware of the tremendous attacks that are happening at their kids' schools, even in elementary school, so they know this is coming, and make them aware that when the kids go to college, it's going to really intensify. And I let them know what the kids are struggling with. The kids in middle school are struggling with absolute truth. They're struggling with what our culture tells them about sexuality, about the exclusiveness of salvation. If I can tell you, and this is really sad, I've been teaching middle school ministry for about 15 plus years, and I've never seen so much depression and confusion with middle schoolers now that I have ever seen. I mean, there's a lot of depression. I've had several kids in the last couple of years tell me that they're suicidal. I've never seen anything like this, and I think when we grow up in a culture and the kids go to school and they're told that, hey, you're just molecules in motion. You came here by random chances. You're just chemicals. There's no God. Your great ancestors are an amoeba. There's no hope in that. So I think the kids are starting with a difficult place. So to get them ready, a couple things. So we talked about the parents, talking about the kids and the church. So I teach middle school class at my church. A couple things. I think you really have to work with the kids, and that's not just on Sunday. Obviously, Sunday you have lessons and you go over the curriculum. I develop my own curriculum, and mine is apologetic based. I like to get the kids to think. If in any class, if I'm talking more than the kids, I feel like it's not a good class. I want the kids to ask questions and talk, and I can tell you they ask hard questions. Parents, you will be shocked at the questions your kids are asking.
What kind of questions are they asking?
When they ask these difficult questions, I do work with parents and let them know. The questions revolve a lot about sexuality, revolve a lot about the exclusiveness of salvation, about hell can't be real. What about my non-Christian friends? Would God really send them to hell? What about my grandfather that died? How come God didn't let him live? They're asking a lot of hard questions, and they really want answers to the questions.
And you equipped pastors and teachers and parents and grandparents in this way. You equip them through the ministry that you're doing.
I do these podcasts and radio interviews to raise awareness.
Yes.
And I teach the parents at my church and at different churches and church leaders. But my favorite thing is to teach the kids. I have a curriculum that I've developed, and what I do is I like the kids to think about, and we'll start with a situation. The first class I usually do is on absolute truth. I'll ask the kids, hey, can something be true for you but not true for me? Every kid says yes, pretty much. And then after when we start going through it, they realize, well, that statement can't even be true. I mean, and we start going through truth and what truth is. And if something's true, it's true for everybody in all time and all places. And then we go on to the existence of God, and we talk about, hey, is there evidence that God exists? And the kids will say, no, there's no evidence that God exists. And I'll say, what about creation? And they'll say, okay, that's evidence, but hey, that could have been just evolution that did that. And I said, well, let's not even talk about that, because I'm not going to say that God did, but there could be theistic evolution. God could have created the world through evolution. We're not going to have that discussion now. But I said, what about your conscience? You have a conscience. Doesn't that show that there's a God? You have something inside you. I have something inside me. Every human in the world has something inside them that tells them what's right and wrong. And it really makes them think. There's usually a huge pause in the room. And then we start going through a curriculum where we start looking at evidence behind the Bible. But the main thing is we need to get the kids to think in class. Just telling them the Bible stories, they've learned all the Bible stories. By the time they get to middle school, they know about Samson, they know about the resurrection, they know about Jonah. What they really need to do is learn to think critically. And I think that's probably something in the ministry that's lacking.
Have you ever had a situation where there was a child that you felt was on the edge of, maybe suicide?
There was one girl in a church that I was at, and she came to me and she said, Ed, can I talk to you about something? Middle school. I think she was in 7th grade. And I said, sure. That happens a lot. And it's funny, when you really don't earn the kids' trust by teaching them. You earn the kids' trust by getting to know them outside of class. So that means I take the kids to Six Flags, which I love to do that stuff. So I love to go on the craziest roller coasters. I'm 53, so we'll see how long that happens. These are the times that kids really bring things up to you. You'll be sitting on a roller coaster and with them, and they'll say something. Now, she came to me after church one day, and we were talking, and she said, well, I'm going to tell you, but you've got to promise me you can't tell my parents. And I said, I can't do that. I said, if it's something that I don't have to tell your parents, I won't. But if I have to tell them, I have to tell them. And then she said, well, I'm not going to share it with you. And I said, well, that's okay, but I do want to help you. And then she came back and said, okay. She said, I wanted to let you know that I'm thinking about killing myself. Sorry. And I asked her why. And she just said, I don't know. I just don't have a lot of hope. And then she just talked about problems at home. And so then we sat down and I talked with her and I said, well, you do believe there's a God? And she said, yes. And I said, do you believe in Jesus? And she said, yes. And I said, well, though you have hope. She said, then why do I feel this way? And I said, I don't know why you feel this way. I said, we're born in a world where we're not perfect. Our minds aren't perfect, not just our bodies. We can be born with sickness in our bodies. We can be born with sickness in our minds. I said, there's neurotransmitters in your brain that regulate how you feel. It could have an imbalance. It really doesn't matter why you feel that way, why you feel suicidal. It matters that you need to deal with it. And so I said, you need to talk to your parents. And then she said, well, you talk to my parents. And I said, sure, I'll talk to your parents. And I talked to her grandmother and her mom and her dad, and she's doing fine. I think it's tough being a preteen these days. There's a lot of pressure on preteens, and I must confess, I don't know why, but in every situation I've dealt with middle school kids over the last couple of years, it's always been the girls in class that have struggled with depression, that have struggled with our culture's view on sexuality. I've never had one of the guys come talking about it. Now, maybe because guys don't like to share, but I think our culture puts a tremendous amount of pressure on girls more than guys right now in a lot of areas.
Have you ever had a situation where you've equipped a child to go out and help another child, another youth?
I was given this presentation to a group of middle schoolers and high schoolers. And it's funny, when you speak to youth, they're much different in the audience than adults. Adults kind of sit there. You're not sure if they're soaking it in. They're not animated. They're kind of quiet. They have etiquette. Kids, they're throwing paper at each other sometimes. They're goofing off. Sometimes they shout during your presentations. It's just an interesting dynamic. So I had one kid, I was talking about evidence the Bible's true. And when I give that presentation, it's very visual because I feel like I can tell kids things like, hey, the walls of Jericho have been discovered. But if I show them a picture of the walls of Jericho, show them the guy in front of it that discovered it, it really makes a much bigger impression. So in this situation, we were talking about Samson. And if you remember in the story of Samson, when Samson was at the temple, the Bible says that there were two pillars and he was tied to the two pillars. And then he pressed the two pillars, and the temple collapsed. So I had showed a picture of a temple. Now they haven't discovered the temple, that particular temple. They think they know where it is, but they can't dig it up because there's a city on top of it, right? But they discovered a lot of temples built by the Philistines, and all the temples had these two big pillars that held up the roof, and a large man could actually put his hands on both pillars. So it's just an evidence that the Bible story is true. So when I showed that picture, he stood up. He was 12 years old. He stood up in the middle of class, and he said, "Oh my God!" I'm just quoting what he said, but he said, "I believe the Bible is true now." And he turned around to all the kids and he said, "You better believe it too." And he has become a kid that I have seen grow so much. He's had a lot of he's had a difficult time in his life in a lot of areas, health wise, and just with he lost a parent, but God's really using him to reach some of the other kids. So that's one situation that always makes me smile. And also, when I give these presentations at conferences outside of my middle school group, I always tell the kids, I say, if you feel like God is calling you to do what I'm doing with kids, you make sure you come talk to me. I want to help you. And then after the class, it's not that many. After the class, I may get one or two kids that will come talk to me about it. And what I do is I have books that I give. I have a copy of a real good apologetics book, and there's a book called The Bible Answer Book by Hank Hanegraaff. I'm not endorsing Hank Hanegraaff. I mean, there's good things and bad things about any person. We all have good and bad things about our theology or philosophy. But his book, The Bible Answer Book, is an excellent book. It has answers to about 100 theological questions in everyday language. So I give the kid a copy of that book, and I have him read that book and tell him to go out and start doing this as he pleases. So, and I've seen that happen a few times, not as much as I would like, but I've seen that happen a few times.
How bad is the crisis of the youth in leaving the church right now?
So it's really bad. I mean, the odds are stacked against us. I mentioned that 70%, research shows that 70% of church youth are leaving the church after high school, and only 1 in 7 of those 7 ever come back.
Why?
They leave. They tell us they leave in studies because of intellectual skepticism. The Bible's not true. I can tell you now why they don't come back. I can't answer that question, but I can tell you why I think they don't come back. There's been really no studies on that. I can tell you that when kids get out of high school, and most kids in our culture go to college, they are just lambasted and tested with a lot of anti-Christian bias. I'm going to read a quote from a professor in college, and you're going to be shocked at what this professor says. I can tell you there is really an agenda when your kids get to college. And I will tell you this, I would say at least once every couple of months, I get a call from a friend of mine, and it goes like this. Hey, Ed, my child went to college, and they're in their freshman year, and now they tell me they don't believe in God. They tell me their philosophy professor has proved that God is not real. Happens all the time. In fact, there was a girl at my previous church who was really involved in our youth ministry. She went off to college in the fall of 2019. 1 month into college, she told her dad, "I don't believe the Bible's true. My philosophy professor proved that." So this happens all the time. So I'm going to read you a quote. This is a quote by Richard Rorty. Now, he's since passed away, but he was a professor of philosophy at Princeton University, of humanities at the University of Virginia, and also a professor of comparative literature at Stanford. So some pretty good schools. And listen to this. This is his quote. It's directed to parents. "We are going to go right on trying to discredit you in the eyes of your children, trying to strip your fundamentalist religious community of dignity, trying to make your views seem silly rather than discussable." So instead of just teaching the topic, what he's telling parents is, I want to destroy your kid's faith. And this is unbelievable. Whatever happened to just teaching the topic. Why is there an agenda to do this? But there is an agenda. In 2013, a professor gave this assignment. Now, I want you to think about whether you would do this assignment. This was the assignment. This was an assignment in intercultural communications. Have the students write the name Jesus in big letters on a piece of paper. Ask the students to stand up and put the paper on the floor in front of them with the name facing up. Ask the students to think about it for a moment. After a brief period of silence, instruct them to stomp on the paper.
Oh
So here
my.
you have in-class assignment, write Jesus on a piece of paper, and then stomp all over it. Now you may say, okay, that's just an academic exercise. I think it's a lot more than that. The Bible says if you deny Jesus before men, he'll deny us before the Father. Well, there was a student named Ryan Rotella, and he wouldn't do it. He said, that's against my faith. I'm not going to do it. And unfortunately, the university really didn't do anything about it. All they did was offer an apology for any offense that this caused, but they didn't reprimand the professor. Now, for those that don't think this is a big deal, replace Jesus with Muhammad and then think about the repercussions, because there would be significant repercussions.
Absolutely.
So our kids' faith is being tested so much in college. I'm going to give one more example. I live in Maryland, and this is at a college, actually 20 minutes from my house. So Brandon Jenkins wanted to become a radiation therapy technician. And you have to, once you're in school, you have to apply for that program after you're in school. So he applied for that program. And during the interview, he was asked by the director of that program, what's the most important thing in your life? Now, I'm a Christian. If somebody asked me that, he didn't ask me what the most important thing is in my field or in my schoolwork. He asked me what the most important thing in my life is. I would say my faith. I would say Christ. So he answered, my God. So his application was rejected. And believe it or not, the director gave this answer. I understand that religion is a major part of your life. However, this field is not the place for religion. If you interview in the future, you may want to leave your thoughts and beliefs out of the interview process. Now, a lot of times the colleges or the schools, they come to their senses a couple of days later and they apologize, even though the faith of the kid has really been dinged. In this situation, this is what the college said, doubled down on their advice, and they said, that's not bad advice. And this was in 2015. So this stuff is going on in our college campuses. There is an agenda to destroy the kids' faith in college. And you would think it's just in the state universities. There is an agenda in a lot of the college universities. There is a liberalism in theology, and I'm not talking about politicalism. I'm talking political liberalism. I'm talking about theological liberalism that has taken over. And there's a real agenda to destroy faith. And that's why I think a lot of the kids leave the faith, because number one, the kids don't know this attack is coming. If they knew the attack was coming, they could be kind of mentally prepared. Number two, I think kids don't understand why they believe what they believe. They know the stories in the Bible, but do they understand why they believe what they believe? Do they understand that, hey, there's evidence for God? My conscience shows that. There's a lot of archaeological evidence that shows the Bible's real. We hear a lot of times, hey, there's no evidence that Jesus existed. That's ridiculous. I mean, you have secular historians like Josephus and Pliny that talk about Jesus, that talk about John the Baptist, that talk about James, Jesus' brother. I mean, there's a lot of extra biblical evidence. In fact, I don't have time to go into it right now, but there's indisputable evidence outside of the Bible that Jesus' tomb was empty. So our kids need to, number one, be ready for this testing, to know that it's coming when they go to college, or it also would come in the workforce, and also to understand why they believe what they believe so that they can kind of deal with this. So that would be how I would kind of address that issue.
So you go around to the churches and schools. You've done radio programs and podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
How can somebody, now you're doing it virtually, how can somebody get in touch with you to maybe have a Zoom conference with you?
The best way is just send me an email. I'll give out my email address. It's edls@yahoo.com. So Edward, David, Larry, Sam @yahoo.com. When you email me, I'll answer and I'll do my best to do what I can. If it's virtual, it's easy to do. I prefer to come out. But obviously during this COVID time, a lot of churches aren't doing that. But I would love to do it. It's my passion. It's what God has called me to do, and I've never charged a cent to speak, and I never will. God's blessed me with a good living, and I feel like this is something that He's calling me to do, and make it open to anyone or any church or any school that or any group of parents that needs it. So I'm glad to do it.